This is the Pepperwood Podcast, a production of Pepperwood, a nonprofit conservation organization based at a 3,200-acre nature reserve near Santa Rosa, California, in the heart of the traditional homeland of the Wapo people. At Pepperwood, we aim to inspire conservation through science. And on this show, we talk to scientists, stewards, and environmental educators about what they do and how they do it. We hope to give you a glimpse into the real experiences of folks who devote their lives to taking care of local ecosystems and sharing them with others. Welcome, Pepperwood community. Welcome to our first episode of the year in 2025. I'm Julianne, environmental educator at Pepperwood and your host for this podcast. We are starting the new year off with a look back at a milestone that Pepperwood experienced in 2024. The 30-year anniversary of Preserve Manager Michael Gillogly's time at the reserve, an anniversary which took place and which I celebrated with a conversation with Michael back in April of 2024. First, we'll hear from Michael about his process of joining Pepperwood and a few major events and projects that he has seen in his 3 decades at the reserve. Then, Michael was excited to discuss an aspect of stewardship about which he is very passionate: the use of targeted cattle grazing as a tool for increasing biodiversity and carbon sequestration, particularly in grassland habitats. We touched on this a little in episode 4 as we talked grasslands with Michelle Halber. Michael presents some of the context and the process of this practice. His experience and enthusiasm for the possibilities of conservation-minded grazing practices really shines through. Since this was the very first conversation we recorded for this podcast project, we were using different equipment and, consequently, the conversation sounds a bit different. To prioritize Michael's thoughts and messages, I'm going to present a series of vignettes from our conversation. We'll go back and forth between a bit of context from me and Michael's invaluable stories and perspectives. Thanks for following us through this conversational journey, my friends. I feel pretty confident that you're going to enjoy it. Now, where shall we start? How about the beginning? My first question for Michael was, what led him to begin his work in conservation and preserve management? What was he doing before he began his time at Pepperwood?
Well, I was really liking the idea of having a real positive impact on a landscape and just a positive impact in my life. I had done a lot of political organizing in my life, working on campaigns and trying to get initiatives passed and trying to make change that way. And while we did some good work, it was always a struggle and 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of things, and working on political campaigns where the candidate didn't win, and you put a whole lot of effort and time into these things. And there was always that, controversial side of, back and forth. And so I really look forward to the idea of working on a piece of land where the effort that you put into it, you see the results of. It's one of the reasons that I liked construction and carpentry, and that is that you do something and you can stand back and see what you built. And I was able to take that concept into land stewardship, and we've pretty much really knocked back yellow star thistle, so it's hard to find here now. And we've had lots of really strong impacts, whereas wildlife is really benefiting. Bears have come back in a big way, the mountain lion population, and we've worked really hard at removing invasive species and trying to make our forests more healthy by doing forest thinning and prescribed fire. And so it's just great to be able to put effort into something and see the results from it and really end up with a healthier environment as a result.
What a reward. Yeah, those tangible results. That sounds wonderful.
It's been an honor to do this kind of work. It's like, what a great job where you can go out every day and work with a piece of land, work with great people, and accomplish something that's really good for everybody.
Next, we dive into the story of how Michael found Pepperwood as his professional and personal home of 30 years and beyond. This was back in 1994 when the reserve was owned and managed by the California Academy of Sciences.
My wife actually saw an announcement of this position at the Academy on a bulletin board, and we both looked forward to the idea of getting out of the East Bay where we were living at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I applied for the position, which at the time was a house to live in exchange for 40 hours of work a month. Mm-hmm. So it was a good fit because they were looking for somebody who had experience, fixing things. I'm a carpenter, plumber, electrician, and but I also have a degree in biology and led lots of trips, and so it was a nice mix of having some real practical skills along with having some education background as well. So it was a good match, and we moved to the Garrison Canyon at Pepperwood, which is a little 700 square foot cabin that hadn't had any work done on it for a long, long time. So my first job was just to bring it up to a livable place. We knocked the crumbling old fireplace down and put in a hearth and a wood stove and put in some skylights and a new roof on it and remodeled the kitchen and the bathroom and all to make it so it was a little bit more livable. So, soon after April of 94, I started doing other projects here. So road maintenance, we put fencing around some of the sensitive wetlands at Pepperwood, so because we were still doing cattle grazing and wanted to be able to control the cattle a little bit better. And so did invasive weed work and just fix things as they broke, replace toilets and, fix the refrigerator and,
Sure.
All those myriad of things that it takes to keep a place running.
A few decades down the road, Michael and his family were living at Pepperwood when the 2017 Tubbs fire impacted over 90% of the reserve, and the house that they were living in was destroyed during that event. Michael shared some of the ecological details of that event and some lessons that we as a community can learn from the catastrophic wildfires of the past decade.
I mean, for the most part, the Tubbs fire was really beneficial if you look at it as an ecological event, Mm-hmm. The fire burnt through the southern part of the preserve very intensely the first night, being really wind-driven, and particularly our Douglas fir forest took it pretty hard. Lots of tree mortality from that. The fire killed the trees, mm-hmm. and Douglas firs aren't very good at resisting fire as compared to oaks that have a much denser and thicker bark. So they've evolved to do pretty well with fire, whereas Douglas firs have evolved to have the seeds in the ground, and they after a fire they rejuvenate that way, right? Mm-hmm. So the trees get killed, but the plant has evolved to come back from it, whereas the oaks can survive more. Mm-hmm. So after the first night, the fire then moved north across the 3,000 acres of the preserve, and it burnt more as a understory fire, and really benefited the environment by clearing out a lot of that fuel and giving other plants an opportunity to express themselves. I think we found, I'm forgetting now, 7, 8 new species of plants that we'd never seen before here.
Incredible. And
Pepperwood's really well studied. If it's here, we usually know about it. And so to find some new plants, fire followers they're called, that need the heat and the smoke and the chemical reaction in order for their seeds to germinate. They're sitting there in the soil from probably 1964 when the Hanley fire came, and wow. Sitting there all this time, and then with the fire they rejuvenated that way. It's the people systems that didn't do very good with wildfire. People lost their lives, and lots of houses got burned down, including my own. And that's the thing that I think is the real lesson that we're all learning, is that we live in a fire-adapted area, and fires are going to keep happening. And apparently with climate change, they're going to be happening more and more intensely, is what we're learning. And so the people systems need to adapt, like the wild systems have. You know, wildlife did pretty well through the fire, and vegetation has evolved with fire. It works pretty well, and so people need to evolve with fire as well. So we need to be thinking about where we build our houses, what we build them out of, how we manage the vegetation around them, having emergency response people being funded and trained so they know what to do in an emergency, having escape routes to be able to get out from your house and get away to be safe. You know, all those things are things that we have to be thinking a lot more about so that we can be smart about that. Yeah, we live here, fire's going to happen, so let's be prepared for it next time.
A fairly recent project that I was curious about was the Bechtel House Remote Grid, part of PG&E's solar pilot project that was launched at Pepperwood's Bechtel House in September of 2023. I asked Michael to explain that project's genesis and implications.
Yeah, PG&E came to us and said, we have this pilot program that we're interested in starting. They had done one of these in the Sierras, and they were interested in pursuing it more. And the idea behind it is to create these microgrids, so providing power for a house or a group of houses, and then being able to remove the power lines that run to those houses. So power lines being a risk of starting wildfires, and PG&E has to insure them, and they have to do maintenance on them, and they have to do the vegetation management. And so the question was, can we create these microgrids to give the electrical power that buildings need or people want, and get rid of the power lines? Is it economical to do that? And so this was a pilot project to do just that. And PG&E offered a backup system, a diesel generator, so that if the sun didn't shine for a week and when the batteries went down, there'd be a backup. And we weren't really interested in that. The Bechtel House where we did this project is available for people who are coming on a short-term basis. Researchers stay in there for a night or two. And so it seemed like we had a good opportunity to try this without the backup system and see if we could make it work. So we asked them to design the system to last at least 4 or 5 days with cloud cover, which is fairly common that we get sunshine and the system can recharge within having one full sunny day. So it's worked out pretty good that way, and we don't have to have a diesel fossil fuel backup system that way. So it's the first 100% renewable microgrid that PG&E has built in California. So we're very proud of that.
Then we dug into the stewardship-oriented grazing practices that Michael has been managing at Pepperwood for many years. Like many of us, Michael experienced a big change in perspective when it came to the possibility of cattle herds having a positive effect on native habitats.
I had watched grazing animals, particularly cows in the Sierras, really trashing some beautiful Sierra meadows. And, the impact of cattle on the grasslands of California historically has been really negative. We put too many animals on the land. In those early days when Europeans were coming to this country, they were bringing those grazing animals, and the hay and the ships that they brought over here for the animals had seeds from the Mediterranean climates that we are in here, so they just flourished here because they didn't have any of their natural control mechanisms. And so a combination of overgrazing and introduction of non-native invasive plants really degraded the grasslands of California. Mm-hmm. So it was a real learning experience for me to see that grazing animals actually can have a really positive impact. After coming at it from this idea of grazing animals are bad, to seeing that native plants in California really evolved with grazers. And, at that time it was elk and pronghorn antelope and big herds of deer. And So with that evolution, the plants do really well actually with some disturbance from grazing animals. And if you've ever seen a landscape after a big group of animals come through, I'm thinking of like caribou in Alaska, or some of the big herds moving across the plains of Africa. They have a really big impact. You can tell a bunch of animals have been here, but they're on the move. They're going somewhere, or they're being approached by predators, and so they're staying in a herd where they're safer, and they're moving across the landscape, so they have a big impact, and then they move off on going somewhere else. And that's what we've really learned by watching how things are going here at Pepperwood and doing scientific monitoring of what the impacts are of our grazing program, is that it's not so much about overgrazing isn't how intensely you hit the landscape that first time. It's getting the animals off and letting it recover. So what we call rest period, the amount of time that the plants have to come back after they've been grazed down to the ground, is what's really key. So that's one thing I learned, is that grazing doesn't have to be bad. It's really how you manage it that's what really matters.
Michael went on to describe the history of grazing at the reserve and how our current practice works in terms of how the cattle are moved about and how the ecosystem can respond to this practice when we are successful.
Yeah, when I first came, we had 4 big pastures, and they were in the 200 or 300 acre size. And so the cows would come here in December and leave in June, and we would move them between those 4 pastures, usually getting 2 rotations through all those pastures in that amount of time. And what we have been doing now for the last almost 12 years now is really learning this idea of adaptive multi-paddock grazing is what some people are calling it. Targeting grazing, prescribed grazing, conservation grazing. People come up with all these names for this. But the basic idea is trying to mimic what I was just talking about of the wild herds that used to be here. So by using more fencing, we use a lot of electric fencing here, and either portable water systems, or we've been developing our springs so that we have water troughs spread throughout the grasslands. And that way you can move the animals a lot, because you create smaller paddocks, and so the animals have a big impact there, like I was saying, but then you move them off to the next paddock. And so right now we're moving cows every 3 to 7 or 8 days.
Wow.
So you, like I say, you have a big impact, and you get them off, and you don't bring the animal back until those plants have really regenerated from that grazing. So they've grown back. And what people have been finding is that that's really a healthy thing for the grassland, that disturbance is important, getting rid of the thatch layer, eating some of that biomass down, and then the hoof action of the animals, and the feces and the urine and the hoof punch on the ground. All those things are natural systems. It's just that it used to be done by elk and antelope, and now we're doing it with grazing animals. So it's a good food source for people at the same time. And what we've been seeing also is that by grazing the plant, so you have a grass plant, and the animal comes and eats it down a little bit. Well, underground, those plants are losing some of their root mass because they're equalizing. As you eat the top exposed part of the plant, some of the root material goes off into the soil, and that's just carbon. So you're having a plant taking carbon out of the atmosphere and distributing it into the ground. And native bunch grasses have incredible root systems that go down as much as 20 feet in the ground, whereas the invasive annuals, we're talking less than a foot into the ground. So by supporting having native grasslands and by having the plant eaten down and then get the animal off, it grows back, then you bring the animal back and it eats it down again. Each time you do that cycle, you're putting more carbon into the soil. So our grasslands actually have incredible potential for carbon sequestration, and we talk about planting trees and all that, which is an important thing, but we have so much grasslands throughout the planet that people really see this as a really great opportunity moving forward to properly manage our grasslands so that they can sequester more carbon into the soil that way. And when a wildfire comes through, all that carbon's down in the ground, so you don't lose it. Whereas when a tree burns up in a wildfire, that carbon's going back into the atmosphere again. So it's a good system, and we need to be more careful about how we manage our grasslands for that purpose.
What are some of the signs you look for that tell you, it's time to move the cattle from this area?
Well, it really varies. So right now, at this time of the year, we're doing what we call fast moves, where we're just having the cattle in, eating the grass down just a little bit, and then moving them on to the next paddock and trying to get all the way through all the paddocks. And then in the second round, we'll have the biomass down to the level that we're looking for. And it's what they call RDM, residual dry matter. It's how much of the plant material is left when you move into the dry season where there's no more growth happening. And we try to vary that. There are places that will have it down to maybe 1,000 pounds per acre, which is fairly short grass, and there's places that it might be 2,000 or 3,000 where there's some taller grass. And the idea is that different animals need different amounts of grass there, different amounts of biomass. The burrowing owls, which we don't really have here, we have a few passing through, but burrowing owls really like almost dirt. They like it really grazed down a lot. That's why we see them at airports and stuff out in the fields where they're mowed down to the ground, and they think that's great. And other animals want to hide in the deep grass. So we're trying to mix it up a little bit when we go from one paddock to the next, and leave different amounts of grass there.
Kind of aiming for that mosaic look.
Exactly.
Right?
Mosaic is the term we use a lot. Yep.
Fantastic. So it sounds like you have more than a decade of experience with watching how this grazing regime impacts the grasslands. So have you learned things through that process? Other than what you've already said?
Yeah, well, I think, the carbon sequestration is one thing. By removing some of the biomass and some of the thatch buildup, you get more sunlight into the soil, and so you get the seed bank that's there germinates, and so you get a lot more diversity in plant life because of that, exposing the soil to some sun. And you don't want it just bare soil. It's a mix, and we try to mix up our grazing intensity so you have different impacts. So some places we leave the grass long, other places we graze it down pretty low, because different animals and organisms need to have that diversity. Instead of doing the same thing everywhere, you try to mix it up a little bit. So we're seeing more native forbs, the wildflowers, and non-native ones too, but just a greater diversity by having the grazing program.
Well, if there are any consistent messages that I have received in my time studying ecology, increased diversity makes for stronger ecosystems. So it's exciting to hear that cattle grazing can be managed in a way that supports increased biodiversity in Pepperwood's habitats. Michael went on to reflect on the beef cattle industry as a whole and Pepperwood's relationship with our current grazing partners, Markegard Family Grass-Fed.
We contract for our grazers, the people who own the cattle and bring them here, and we manage them kind of jointly. So I think it's a challenge for people who are raising cattle and for meat and trying to have a business model that works. It's the beef production in our country is really geared around feedlots and trying to fatten animals up with corn, and this is a real different way of approaching it, grass-fed beef. And so developing a market for that and being successful is a challenge for a lot of people. And it's one reason we're really happy working with Markegard Family Grass-Fed, because they're they've figured out how to make it work, and so they're financially successful, which really helps them be successful on the land, right? They can manage the cattle in a way that we're asking, and they really support the idea of having healthy food and healthy grasslands go hand in hand. So it's been really great working with them.
As a reflection on his 30 years of experience, I asked Michael one of those old chestnuts. What has been his proudest accomplishment in his time at Pepperwood?
I think just bringing fire back, it's something that we've wanted to do. It's a really important tool. And so being able to get fire back on the landscape is really a great accomplishment. And, my assistant, Devin Friedfeld, he was in the first group of 15 to get his burn boss certificate from the state that allows him to sign off on burns and conduct burns. And so I just feel really grateful to him and proud of him for going through that step and taking that responsibility, because it's a big deal to put fire on the ground and to do it in a responsible and thoughtful way. And so he writes burn plans about there's a very specific set of conditions that have to be there for a burn to happen. So the air temperature, the relative humidity, the wind, you need to have good dispersal of the smoke so that it doesn't settle down and become a health hazard to the people who are going to be there. So the fuel moisture, how much moisture is in the things that are actually going to burn. And so you write a prescription that the conditions have to be within this window for all of those different considerations. And then you have to have the personnel there. And so that's another part of the prescription of how many fire trucks do you need? How many people do you need? How much fire hose? All this stuff that goes into having a safe burn. So Devin's able to write that plan and then initiate it with a group of people. And that's been another really great thing that I'm proud of, is the community building that has come together around doing these burns.
I was going to say, it takes a lot of, reciprocal help, right? There's a lot of interdepartmental and...
Exactly. All of us are coming together. There's this volunteer group called the Good Fire Alliance, which is people who are interested in getting fire back on the ground. And some of it's organizations, a lot of it's just individuals who want to see this. And so they're getting trained about how to be a practitioner of getting fire back on the ground. And so, when we do a burn, the Sonoma Land Trust is there, the state parks is there, regional parks is there, multiple fire agencies from around Sonoma County. It's great to see. It's kind of, the barn building, or, all the community coming together to make something really good happen. And, so Pepperwood goes to other people's burns and we support them as well. And we have our own fire truck, a truck with a water tank and a pump in the back that we can loan out to other organizations that are doing burns.
So continuing to support those partnerships.
Exactly, because we're so far behind. We have a lot of work to do to try to get our forests back into a healthy balance again, and it's really going to take that and a lot more. We're just scratching the surface of what needs to happen.
But at least we're scratching the surface.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think we're going to see it. It's just we have to keep pushing. We really need to develop a workforce to be able to do this kind of work. Mm-hmm. And so I think training people to be able to go into the forest and know what to do and have the skills and the support, financial support, the tools to get the work done is really key. And it's great work. And I think having young people trained about how to go out and work in the forest and improve the health, the wildlife, and the water quality, and all that it's beneficial, and I think people will get a lot out of it.
On the flip side, I brought out another classic interview question. What is the biggest challenge of managing Pepperwood as a reserve and an organization?
Well, I think the financial part of it is always a struggle. none of this stuff happens for free. And so we have to raise the money to take care of the land and to run the programs that we have. And so it's always a constant effort to be raising the money. And so most of our funding comes through donations from donors who want to see this kind of work get done and support what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And we write a lot of grants and get money both from private foundations, family foundations, as well as agencies, state and federal agencies who support what we're doing. So it's a constant effort and probably the most challenging part of my job.
Those thoughts led us directly to the question, what's the best way to support Pepperwood as a member of the community?
Well, I mentioned our challenge with fundraising, so helping us out financially is a really big piece of the pie to make things work, and it's hard to ask for money, but it's just critical to making things work here.
Yeah.
So
it's the nature of a nonprofit is that we need that support, absolutely, to get all this good work done.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely.
And then you can come and volunteer here. There's lots of opportunities. The best way to get started is to come to our volunteer work days that are the first Saturday of every month. And they've actually are almost competitive now because people love coming to them. It's just a great opportunity to have a sense of community and doing good, positive work together. And, we work really hard together for 3 hours that morning, and we organize our activities really well so they're productive and people come and you get stuff done. And then for 3 hours you get tired and you're done. And then we really found early on that feeding people makes all the difference in the world. So a couple of our volunteers cook a hot meal for lunch.
Excellent.
And so...
and I understand there's lots of cookies available.
And there's lots of cookies. Yes, Flora is the cookie lady, so she's always got great diversity of cookies for everybody.
So her legend tells.
Yes.
Finally turning our attention back to nature itself. With his 30 years of time spent in Pepperwood's lovely habitats and among its many furred and scaled and feathered denizens, I just had to ask.
What's your favorite species that lives on the property, Michael?
Oh, geez, that's a hard one.
I know.
I like seeing the big carnivores, but they're rare to see. I've only seen one mountain lion since I've been here.
One mountain lion sighting in 30 years. That is rare.
Yeah. And our cameras, we have wildlife motion activated cameras out there and they see them all the time. Mm-hmm. But it's rare for us.
They probably know you. They say, that's
yes,
Michael.
I've wondered how many times they've watched me. So seeing bears, I've seen a couple of bears here over the time. But I think, a lot of the smaller critters, I'm kind of partial to snakes, and had a great interaction with a spotted owl once that I was walking through a really dense bottom of a ravine, and I was kind of making my way through the vegetation, and all of a sudden there was a bunch of flapping right at my head, and I was kind of like, what is all that, And the bird landed on a tree that was just like 6 feet away from me, but on the back side of the tree. And I'm looking there, and it peeks its head around from the side of the tree to look at me, and we're both standing there looking at each other. And then it flies to a branch just a few feet away from me and just sits there. And we just contemplated each other for a long time and talked back and forth a little bit. And I started looking around on the ground, like, did it have something that it had caught that it was eating? And that's why it wasn't leaving. And I didn't see anything. And we must have been there for 20 minutes just staring at each other, like 6 or 8 feet apart.
Wow.
And I finally thought, okay, well, it's been fun. I'm going to go now. And I walked away.
Good.
It was such a wonderful little interaction.
It's beautiful. You got to just accept each other there in that moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. Well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. This has been not just informative, but an absolute delight. So thank you very much. And anything else that you would like the people to know about Pepperwood?
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my passion, which is about taking care of land and working with people. So
wonderful.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Keep up the good work.
Thanks again to Michael for the conversation and for his patience waiting for this episode to come out. If you'd like to hear anything more about what we discussed, or if you have a follow-up question about anything that Michael said, please email it to us at podcast@pepperwoodpreserve.org. Thanks as always to Stephanie Antonoro, our communication coordinator, and to our IT firm, DeepNet, for helping us distribute this podcast out to all of the various feeds. We are now available almost anywhere that folks access podcasts, so tell your friends. And now, as always, it's time to play the Nature Sound Guess Who game. Some of our listeners have been waiting for many weeks to have their curiosity satisfied about last episode's nature sound, so let's not dally. At the end of episode 4, we heard the dulcet tones of this local critter. That sound was made by the minor cicada, Platypedia minor. The full clip is about 30 seconds long and is accessible as part of an iNaturalist observation, just like the clip of the gray fox we heard back in episodes 2 and 3. We will include a link to the observation in our show notes. It was recorded and shared to iNaturalist by Elliot Smeds, a local naturalist and scientist, and someone I am happy to call both a colleague and a friend. On iNaturalist, Elliot is a top observer and identifier of this species, and no doubt several local cicada species. And he was a classmate of mine in the Sonoma State University biology department. We actually sat next to one another at our undergraduate graduation in the Green Center in May of 2017, and we both went on to complete master's degrees at Sonoma State. So those were some fun facts about Elliot. Now let's have some fun facts about the minor cicada. First, they are not among the famous periodical cicadas. That's 7 species in the genus Magicicada, and those are found in the eastern United States. And they famously take either 13 or 17 years to mature and emerge in huge reproductive cohorts at those intervals. Other cicadas, including the minor cicada, are still long-lived. It takes them up to 5 years to reach maturity, and they have overlapping generations, so some individuals emerge every year, and they are therefore called annual cicadas, as opposed to periodical cicadas. Even within the annual cicada group, the genus Platypedia is unique in that they do not have the stupendous sound-making organ that is so characteristic of other cicada species. In most cicadas, the males have a taut, drum-like membrane called a tymbal at the base of their abdomen, and they use strong muscles to vibrate that membrane and produce a powerful sound to attract mates. When I chose this nature mystery sound for you, I specifically avoided the really intense, ear-piercing sounds made by most cicadas. In comparison, the minor cicada and other members of the genus Platypedia emit the short clicking sounds that you heard by rattling their wings together. So maybe it's a less singular and impressive trait, but in my humble human opinion, it is much nicer than listening to that incredibly ear-piercing sound. Just listen back to our minor cicada sound. Ah. Gentle, soothing, specially compared to other cicadas. If you would like the comparison, we will put a link to one of Elliot's other iNaturalist observations in the show notes, but I'm not going to shock your ears here by reproducing it. Please go check it out on your own. This background information came from the National Wildlife Federation's Field Guide to Insects and Spiders of North America by Arthur V. Evans, and also the book California Insects by Jerry A. Powell and Charles L. Hogue. Thank you for playing the Nature Sound Guess Who game, but here comes the next new sound for you to guess and for us to reveal in our next episode. Listen up in 3, 2, 1. And here's your second chance in 3, 2, 1. Remember, you can submit your guess of who made that sound by emailing us at podcast@pepperwoodpreserve.org, or find the Facebook or Instagram post where we announce this episode and ask for your guesses. Until next episode, thank you, friends, for listening, and don't forget to keep your ears tuned into nature.